Have you ever had that really specific, highly modern moment of existential dread? You know the one I mean?
Oh yeah, the late night scrolling session.
Exactly. It's like it's late at night, the house is totally quiet, and the only light in the room is just that harsh blue glow of your phone on your face.
Right, and you're just lying in bed, endlessly scrolling through your feed.
Yeah, and suddenly you're just confronted with it, like a devastating image or a headline about a famine or some conflict.
Just profound, systemic human suffering, yeah, happening somewhere out there.
Right. And immediately you feel this overwhelming physical weight. I mean, it's not just a thought. It actually hits you right in the center of your chest.
Because your breathing gets a little shallower, right? It's a visceral biological reaction.
Yeah, exactly.
Your nervous system is actually reacting to a threat, even if that threat is, thousands of miles away to people you'll never even meet.
Right. And because you are a person who possesses empathy, you want to relieve that pressure in your chest.
So you do what we've all been trained to do.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Click the link in the bio, you find some charity, you type in your credit card info, and you donate like $20.
Or maybe you just share the post to your own feed, to spread awareness.
Yeah, awareness.
Mm.
And then you lock your phone, put it on the nightstand, and close your eyes.
Yeah.
But
you still have that hollow feeling.
yes, you're lying there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, and you have this creeping suspicion that despite your $20 leaving your bank account, you didn't actually fix a single thing.
The needle just didn't move. I mean, the machine of suffering is still churning.
And your $20 feels like, I don't know, a grain of sand thrown against the tidal wave.
It is a very specific kind of exhaustion that really defines our era.
It really does.
We have this unprecedented visibility into the pain of the world, but it's combined with this totally unprecedented feeling of powerlessness to actually stop it.
It's the sensation of trying to empty the ocean with a teaspoon. You're putting in the effort, you're taking on the emotional toll, but the math of the universe just doesn't seem to care. Well, welcome to the deep dive. If you're joining us today, you are exactly the kind of person who wrestles with that late-night ceiling staring session.
You want to understand the mechanics of the world.
Exactly. And more importantly, you want to know how your actions fit into those mechanics. So today, we are going to completely rewire how you process that feeling of empathy.
We're going to look at how you interact with the suffering of the world.
Right. And we're going to examine a framework that attempts to turn your empathy from a passive emotion into basically a highly engineered technology.
And we're approaching this from a pretty unusual angle today. I mean, we aren't looking at some traditional self-help book or a psychological study.
No, we are diving into a document called the Peaceful World Manifesto.
Mm-hmm.
Specifically, we're looking at version 1.0, the public academic version.
Now, for some context, if you were to actually sit down and read this entire document front to back,
Which should take a while.
yeah, you would be reading this massive, sprawling, highly technical architectural blueprint.
Right? It's an audacious attempt to write the operating system for a completely peaceful human civilization.
They tackle everything from macroeconomic structures to the redistribution of global resources.
Digital democracy, the ethical constraints of AI. I mean, it is a macro-level text.
It's really attempting to solve the human equation on a planetary scale.
Yeah, it operates on this assumption that war and systemic poverty and structural violence, they aren't inevitable human traits.
Right, they're just the results of poorly designed societal systems that we can actually re-engineer.
But here is our specific mission for this deep dive. We are putting on intentional, heavy blinders.
We are ignoring all those grand geopolitical theories today.
Yeah, we are bypassing the digital voting systems and the AI ethics. We're going to completely isolate and forensically examine just one single dense paragraph from this massive text.
It's point 7 in their outline.
Right, and it's titled simply Active Compassion.
What makes this specific paragraph so critical to the rest of the manifesto is that it scales all of those grand planetary ambitions all the way down to the individual human heart.
Wow, yeah.
In just a handful of sentences, the authors are attempting to completely dismantle our conventional understanding of empathy.
Because we usually think of empathy as a passive, warm, fuzzy emotion.
Right.
Something you just feel.
Exactly. But the manifesto treats it as a measurable, high-impact system. It's something you do.
I really love that distinction. Treating compassion not as a feeling, but as a technology.
Yeah, it's a total paradigm shift.
And I guarantee you, this one paragraph contains an entire universe of ethical philosophy. By the time we're done unpacking it, concept by concept, it is going to fundamentally challenge how you view helping others.
It holds a very unforgiving mirror up to our best intentions.
Right. It asks whether those intentions are actually structurally sound. So let's just jump right into the deep end.
Let's do it.
The manifesto starts this paragraph by demanding a massive conceptual shift. It explicitly states that its guiding principle is, and I quote, not passive sympathy, but the active elimination of the causes of suffering.
The text immediately draws this hard line in the sand between two concepts that our culture constantly blurs together, sympathy and compassion.
Right. They are diagnosing a flaw in our moral vocabulary.
Exactly. Passive sympathy is an internal emotional state. It's that scenario you described at the start of the show, scrolling on your phone, feeling that pang in your chest, shedding a tear.
Yeah.
Sympathy happens entirely within the observer.
So the text demands a shift away from that internal emotional experience toward an external structural intervention.
It's the difference between looking at a collapsing building and feeling profound sadness for the people inside versus actually walking up to the building and installing a steel support beam.
Oh, that's a great way to put it. One is an emotional reaction to a reality. The other is the alteration of that reality.
And look closely at the precise phrasing they use. The active elimination of the causes of suffering.
That causes.
Yes. The inclusion of the word causes is the linchpin of this entire philosophy. It's not just about alleviating the symptom.
Right, because if someone is starving, passive sympathy just says, I feel terrible that this person has no food.
And a slightly more active response, what most of us would consider a good deed, is handing them a sandwich.
You saw hunger, you provided food.
But this text pushes us much further. It argues that handing them a sandwich is merely symptom management. It's just a temporary pause on their suffering.
Wow.
Your ethical duty, according to this manifesto, is the active elimination of the cause. Why does the hunger exist in the first place?
Right. Is it a broken supply chain? Is it an exploitative labor market? Or, I don't know, a local agricultural failure caused by climate change?
Exactly.
If you just hand out sandwiches every day but never ask why the people have no food, you aren't eliminating the suffering. You're just maintaining it at a survivable level.
Precisely. You actually become part of the ecosystem of the suffering rather than the cure for it.
Let me try to ground this with a slightly more domestic analogy.
Sure.
Let's say you walk into your kitchen one morning and a pipe has burst under the sink.
Yeah.
There is water everywhere.
A total nightmare.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So passive sympathy is sitting down on the flooded floor, getting your clothes all soaked, and just crying about the water damage. You are deeply, genuinely feeling the tragedy of the flooded kitchen.
Right.
Now, society tells us that the next step up is compassion, which usually looks like grabbing a mop.
Right. So you start mopping up the water.
You spend hours mopping, but the pipe is still bursting.
Mm-hmm.
Active compassion, as defined by this text, isn't grabbing a mop. It's grabbing a wrench, getting under the sink, and fixing the broken pipe.
Because the mop just manages the symptom. The wrench eliminates the cause.
Exactly.
The real danger of the mop is that it makes you feel incredibly productive. I mean, you are sweating, you're working hard, you are wringing out the water.
You feel like a hero.
You feel like you are solving the problem, but all you're doing is holding back the tide.
Hold on, let me challenge the text's apparent dismissal of the mop, and more importantly, its dismissal of sitting on the floor and crying.
Okay, go ahead.
Isn't feeling that passive sympathy the absolute necessary first step? I mean, human beings are emotional creatures.
We are, yeah.
If I don't feel a sense of distress about the flooded kitchen, if my heart doesn't break when I see the news story, why would I ever bother looking for the wrench in the first place?
That's a fair point.
It just sounds incredibly cold to write off sympathy as passive and tell people to just get to work. Doesn't this framework risk diminishing the value of a caring heart?
That is a very common reaction when people first encounter systemic ethical frameworks like this. It feels cold.
Yeah, it does.
But if we extrapolate the mechanics of this philosophy, the authors are not banishing human emotion. They aren't suggesting we turn into unfeeling robots who only calculate root causes.
Okay, so what are they arguing?
What they are arguing is that sympathy, on its own, is an incomplete circuit. It is a false summit.
A false summit. Like climbing a mountain thinking you've reached the top, but you've really just reached a ridge that hides the actual peak.
Yes, exactly. Think of sympathy as the spark plug in an engine.
Okay.
The spark is absolutely necessary. It provides the ignition. But if that spark doesn't catch the fuel, if it doesn't move the pistons, if it doesn't drive the vehicle forward toward a tangible solution, then ethically speaking, the spark is useless.
Oh, wow.
In fact, the text implies that passive sympathy can be actively dangerous.
Wait, how could feeling bad for someone be dangerous?
Because it acts as an emotional release valve for the observer, which actually paralyzes action.
What do you mean?
Well, when you feel a deep sense of sympathy when you cry at that news story, your brain chemically rewards you. You get a subtle hit of dopamine and oxytocin that tells your brain, hey, I am a good person because I felt sadness for another human being. I have performed my moral duty by feeling their pain.
Oh my...
And once you receive that biological reward, your motivation to actually fix the pipe plummets.
You close the laptop and you go make dinner.
Exactly. The emotion tricks your nervous system into believing an action was taken, when in reality the status quo remains completely unchanged.
That is incredibly unsettling to think about. The idea that our own empathy is biologically tricking us into complacency.
It's a tough pill to swallow.
I want you to really think about your own media consumption for a second. How often do you fall into that exact trap?
Probably more often than we'd like to admit.
Right. You watch a documentary about a systemic injustice, you feel genuine righteous anger and profound sorrow, you discuss it with a friend, expressing how terrible it all is.
You feel like an activist?
You experience the full spectrum of the emotion, and you feel like you've engaged with the issue. But the PrEP is still leaking.
Always leaking.
The text is demanding that we recognize that biological trick. It argues that stopping at the feeling bad stage is not just insufficient, it's a failure of our fundamental ethical obligation to one another.
We live in a globalized attention economy that is hyper-optimized to generate passive sympathy.
Oh, totally.
Media platforms profit off of your emotional engagement, not your physical intervention. You are bombarded with high-definition suffering, you feel the pain, the platform gets the ad revenue, and you move on.
So the manifesto is demanding we forcefully break that cycle.
Yes. If you feel the sympathy, you are obligated to convert that kinetic emotional energy into a structural action that eliminates the root cause.
Okay, so if we agree that we have to move from this passive emotional state to an active structural state, if we had to stop mopping and start looking for the wrench that requires a completely different way of looking at society.
It absolutely does.
We need a new set of rules for how we interact with problems. And that brings us to the next massive conceptual pillar in point 7. The text states, we complement the ethics of justice with the ethics of care.
This introduces a profound duality into the conversation. And to understand why this is so revolutionary, we really have to deeply analyze the historical dominance of the ethics of justice.
Because in Western philosophy and modern society, justice is kind of the ultimate unquestionable good.
Right. We build our entire civilization around it. Courts, laws, constitutions, human rights tribunals. If a society has justice, we generally consider it a successful society.
But the manifesto argues that justice, while foundational, is structurally incomplete.
Let's look at the mechanics of the ethics of justice. Justice is built on the concepts of fairness, rights, contracts, and accountability.
It's an objective standard applied equally to all.
Exactly. Think of the universal symbol of law, Lady Justice. What are her defining features?
Well, she is blindfolded, and she holds a scale and a sword.
Right. And what does the blindfold represent?
It means she doesn't care who you are. Rich, poor, powerful, weak. The rules apply to everyone equally.
Exactly. It is a cold, calculated, objective balancing of the scales. If you break a social contract, you pay a penalty to rebalance the scale.
It's highly transactional.
Very. And that blindness is necessary to prevent corruption. But the manifesto argues that a society governed only by blind justice becomes incredibly brutal.
Which is why it must be complemented by the ethics of care.
Because the ethics of care takes the blindfold off.
Right.
Yes. The ethics of care is a framework rooted in feminist philosophy and relational ethics. It is not blind. It demands absolute, hyper-specific vision.
It requires you to look at the unique context.
The context, the vulnerabilities, and the specific relationships of the individual. It is based on our inherent responsibility to nurture one another rather than just govern one another.
Let me try to build a framework for this.
Go for it.
If we are looking at how a society functions, justice is the referee of a game. A referee stands on the field, watches the play, and if a player commits a foul or steps out of bounds, the referee blows the whistle and throws a penalty flag.
Right, and the referee does not care why the player stepped out of bounds.
Exactly. The referee doesn't care if the player was tired or confused or carrying an injury. The rule was broken, the penalty is applied, the scales are balanced. But the ethics of care, that's the coach.
The coach operates on a completely different set of metrics.
Right. The coach is on the sideline looking at the context. The coach is making sure the player's hydrated, asking if they slept well the night before. If a player gets hit hard, the coach is the one checking for a concussion, nurturing the injury, and ensuring they don't get hurt in the first place. The referee enforces the boundaries, but the coach sustains the life within those boundaries.
That analogy perfectly highlights the temporal difference between the two concepts.
Temporal difference.
Yeah. Justice is almost entirely reactive. It only steps onto the field after a wrong has been committed.
All right.
The scales only need balancing after they have been tipped. Someone steals, the law reacts. But the ethics of care is proactive. It looks at the societal fabric before it tears.
So it asks the systemic questions.
Yes. Why was this person in a position where stealing felt like the only viable option? Were they starving? Did the educational system fail them? Were they abandoned by their community? Care attempts to eliminate the conditions that make justice necessary.
But this is where the philosophy collides violently with the real world. Because in practice, justice and care constantly contradict each other.
They do all the time.
Let's construct a hypothetical scenario to test this. Let's say we have a single mother who has lost her job, she has absolutely no support network, and her infant is starving. In an act of desperation, she goes to a corporate supermarket and steals baby formula.
A classic ethical dilemma.
Right. Now, the ethics of justice steps in. Lady Justice is blind. The mother broke the social contract regarding private property.
And if we don't enforce property laws, society collapses.
Justice demands she is arrested, charged, and penalized, demands accountability.
But the ethics of care looks at the exact same scenario and is horrified by the arrest.
Because care says this woman is not a malicious criminal.
Yeah.
She's a victim of systemic failure. Exactly. Care demands we provide her with resources, food, and support, not a criminal record that will make it even harder for her to find a job. So how does this manifesto resolve that collision? Does one framework overrule the other?
The resolution lies in a single word the authors chose. Complement.
Okay.
We complement the ethics of justice with the ethics of care. They are not calling for the abolition of laws or the dismantling of accountability. A society without justice dissolves into chaos.
Right. But a society with only justice
Calcifies into a punitive dystopia. They are arguing for a synthesis.
So what does that synthesis actually look like in the case of the mother stealing formula?
It requires a system that holds the tension between accountability and nurturing. The justice component acknowledges that a rule was broken, maintaining the integrity of the social contract.
But the care component intervenes in the penalty phase.
Exactly. Instead of a prison sentence or a crippling fine that pushes her further into desperation, the penalty becomes a mandatory integration into a social support system.
Oh, I see.
She is connected with food banks, job placement programs, and childcare. The system holds her accountable for the action, but takes responsibility for the context that drove her to it.
It's recognizing that punishing a symptom doesn't cure the disease. If we just lock her up, the baby still starves, and the mother is further traumatized.
And we haven't eliminated the root cause of the suffering. We've actually multiplied it in the name of justice.
If a society relies solely on blind justice, its only tool is a hammer, so it treats every societal failure as a nail.
It just builds more prisons.
But by integrating the ethics of care, it builds better schools, robust mental health infrastructure, and stronger community networks.
It ensures that the referee has to blow the whistle far less frequently because the coach has prepared the players to succeed.
Okay, I see how they balance each other. We need the referee to maintain order, but we need the coach to maintain humanity. But if we fail to apply this ethics of care, if we as individuals just sit back and say, well, the rules are the rules, the police will handle it, it's not my problem, the text introduces a concept that is honestly the most challenging and terrifying part of this entire deep dive.
Yeah, this next part is heavy.
The very next sentence in point 7 is a stark, uncompromising declaration. It says, we stand against silent violence indifference.
This is a radical semantic reengineering. They are taking a word we all understand, indifference, the act of doing nothing, of looking the other way, and explicitly classifying it as a form of active violence.
We universally define violence by inaction. Violence is kinetic. It's a strike, a gunshot, a dropped bomb, a physical assault.
Violence requires movement and intent.
But here, the manifesto is defining violence by an omission. by the total absence of action.
Consider the legal and theological concept of a sin of omission. Usually, we are judged solely by what we do. But in highly advanced ethical frameworks, choosing not to act when you possess the power to prevent harm is viewed as a hostile, aggressive choice. By labeling indifference as silent violence, the authors are completely stripping away the illusion of neutrality.
But I have to push back on this on behalf of anyone listening right now, because the psychological burden of this definition is staggering.
It is a lot to carry, yeah.
Let's look at a daily reality. I am walking down a busy city street. I am on my way to work. I have my own problems. I have my own rent to pay, my own family to feed.
Just trying to get through the day.
Right. And as I'm walking, I pass a person experiencing severe homelessness who is clearly in distress. Or, on a macro level, I turn on the news and see a humanitarian crisis unfolding overseas.
Right.
If I choose to keep walking to work, if I choose to change the channel because I just can't handle the emotional weight of it today, am I really committing violence?
I know it sounds harsh.
That feels like an incredibly unfair accusation to hurl at an average person who is just trying to survive their own life.
Yeah.
Am I a violent person just because I'm exhausted?
The resistance you are feeling right now is the exact defense mechanism our brains deploy when confronted with systemic responsibility.
It feels unbearable.
It does. But let's anchor this back to the core philosophy of the text, which views human civilization as a highly interconnected, complex, adaptive system.
Right.
In a deeply interconnected system, there is no such thing as an isolated variable. There is no outside the system. If you exist within the society, you are a gear in its machinery.
So I can't just claim I'm an innocent bystander on the sidelines. The text is saying there are no sides.
Exactly. The current status quo of the world includes immense structural suffering. If you exist in this world and you possess any capacity, financial, social, or physical, to relieve a portion of that suffering, and you consciously choose to look away and do nothing, you are not being neutral. You are actively choosing to preserve the painful status quo. You are providing the silent consent required for the suffering to continue. Therefore, your choice to do nothing is an aggressive preservation of harm. It is a silent swing of the bat.
A silent swing of the bat. That is a chilling image.
It really is.
Think about a time in your own life where you saw something fundamentally wrong. Maybe it was at work, you watched a colleague being harassed or treated unfairly in a meeting.
Or in your community, some situation that just made your stomach turn.
But you chose to look down at your notes. You chose to walk the other way because you didn't want to cause a scene, or you convinced yourself it wasn't your business.
We all do it.
This manifesto is stripping away that comfort. It is telling you that the moment you looked away, you ceased to be neutral. You became an active participant in the violence inflicted on that person.
It completely eradicates the bystander effect. It argues that proximity dictates responsibility. And remember how they just paired this with the ethics of care? The ethics of justice allows you to say, hey, I didn't cause this problem. I didn't break the rule. Therefore, I am not legally required to fix it.
But the ethics of care overrides that.
Yes, it overrides that and says, the problem exists in your shared environment, therefore you are morally obligated to help heal it.
Okay, but this creates a massive paralyzing logistical problem.
How so?
Well, if we accept this premise, if indifference is literally violence, and I am morally obligated to constantly take action to fix the leaking pipes of the world, how do I do that without making things worse?
That's a valid fear.
Because if I just start blindly swinging a wrench at every problem I see, I'm going to break things. How do we know our actions are actually eliminating the causes of suffering? How do we avoid just throwing our limited money and energy at a wall and hoping it does some good?
That is the pivotal question, and the manifesto anticipates it perfectly. If you demand action, you must provide a methodology for that action.
Right. You get a plan.
They don't just command you to care. They provide a rigorous mathematical system for how to care.
The text provides the solution in the next sentence. We rely on the principles of effective altruism. We strive to do the most good possible, using evidence-based methods and reason.
This is where we see the true marriage of the heart and the spreadsheet. This is how active compassion officially becomes a highly calibrated technology.
Effective altruism, commonly known as EA.
Right. It's a real-world philosophical and social movement. Its core premise is a radical shift in how we view charity. It is not just about doing some good.
It's about doing the absolute most good possible.
Yes, with the finite resources at your disposal, whether that resource is your disposable income, your volunteer hours, or even the career path you choose.
So it introduces the concept of optimization to empathy. We usually optimize our businesses or our workout routines, but this is asking us to optimize our compassion,
Precisely. And to optimize compassion, you have to ruthlessly abandon purely emotional responses.
which is hard.
Very hard. As we discussed earlier, emotional responses are highly biased and biologically flawed. We are evolutionarily wired to care disproportionately about things that are physically close to us.
Or things that look like us.
Right. Or things that evoke acute, immediate emotional reaction. Effective altruism dictates that we must use evidence-based methods and reason to bypass those biological biases and focus on interventions that have empirical proof of working.
Let's get into the mechanics of this because I want to talk about how this math is actually calculated.
Okay, sure.
In the world of effective altruism and health economics, they often use a metric called a QAY, a quality-adjusted life year. This is how you measure the most good.
Yes, the QAY is a fascinating and honestly pretty controversial tool. It attempts to quantify the value of a medical or charitable intervention.
Let me break down how a QALA works because it sounds like science fiction, but it's used every day.
Go.
A QALY assigns a numerical value to a year of human life. 1 year lived in perfect, 100% health is equal to 1.0 QELE. A year lived with a severe illness or chronic pain or systemic deprivation might be scored at 0.5 or 0.2 QELOYs.
Death is scored as 0.
Right. So if a charitable intervention like providing a vaccine or funding a surgery gives a person 10 extra years of perfect health, that intervention generated 10 QLOYs.
Makes sense.
Effective altruism uses this math to compare charities. They look at a spreadsheet and say, Charity A generates 1 QLOY for every $1,000 spent. Charity B generates 50 QLYs for every $1,000 spent.
So the math dictates that you must give your money to Charity B.
Because your $1,000 is a finite resource, and directing it to Charity A means 49 potential years of healthy human life were lost due to your inefficiency.
It treats your compassion like an investment portfolio, where the required return on investment is the maximum measurable reduction of global pain.
But let's look at how this math collides with our humanity in practice. Let me set up a deeply uncomfortable scenario to test this logic.
I have a feeling I know where this is going.
Let's say I have $100 in my pocket. I am walking down my street, and I see a local animal shelter trying to raise funds to save a stray dog that needs an emergency surgery.
Okay.
I can see the dog, I can look into its eyes, I can pet it, my heart breaks for it, my empathy is fully engaged.
Of course it is.
But the math of effective altruism says that if I send that same $100 to a highly vetted, evidence-based charity operating across the globe, it could buy enough anti-malarial mosquito nets to definitively save the lives of 10 children.
Yeah.
Does this text and the principle of effective altruism demand that I turn my back on the dog right in front of me?
Yes. Unapologetically, yes. And this is exactly where people find this philosophy incredibly abrasive, almost hostile to human nature.
It feels incredibly cold. It feels like a betrayal of the immediate connection in front of me.
It feels cold to our Paleolithic brains. We evolved in small tribes. For hundreds of thousands of years, our survival depended entirely on caring for the immediate reality within our line of sight.
But we no longer live in a Paleolithic environment.
Exactly. We live in an interconnected global system. The text demands reason and evidence. If the stated goal is the active elimination of the causes of suffering, reason brutally dictates that saving 10 human lives objectively reduces vastly more suffering in the universe than saving one local dog.
Even though walking past the dog makes me feel terrible, and buying nets for kids I will never meet doesn't give me that immediate warm rush of dopamine.
That is the entire point of the system. Effective altruism challenges you to remove your own ego and your biological addiction to that warm glow out of the ethical equation.
Wow.
It forces a very uncomfortable question. Are you donating to feel good about yourself, or are you donating to actually solve the problem?
So if you choose the dog over the 10 children, you are prioritizing your own emotional comfort over the lives of others.
Yes. The math challenges our biological programming.
I want you to seriously audit your own charitable habits right now. Think about the last time you donated money or gave your time.
Ask yourself why you really did it.
Did you do it because the organization had a great marketing campaign that made you cry? Did you do it because a friend pressured you to support their marathon run?
Or did you do it because you opened up a spreadsheet, analyzed independent charity evaluators, and looked at the cost per life saved metrics?
Did you prove to yourself that this specific intervention has the highest statistical probability of eliminating a root cause of suffering? It is an incredibly high, almost exhausting bar to set for human behavior.
It requires treating empathy as an intellectual discipline rather than just a reflex.
But this brings us to a massive, glaring vulnerability in the manifesto's logic.
Which is?
Well, if we're using all this map, if we are constantly looking at spreadsheets, calculating QALYs, and measuring human lives as data points on a cost-benefit analysis, don't we risk turning human beings into literal numbers?
It's a slippery slope.
If I am just an accountant of global suffering, maximizing my QALA output, don't I lose the very humanity that prompted me to care in the first place? Utilitarianism has a very dark history of justifying terrible things for the greater good.
The authors of the manifesto are acutely aware of this trap. They know that a purely mathematical approach to human lives can quickly devolve into a sterile utilitarian nightmare.
So how do they stop that from happening?
That is why they immediately anchor the cold math of effective altruism to a deeply human, non-quantifiable ultimate goal in the very next sentence.
Yes, this is where the text pivots beautifully. It declares, "Our goal is the restoration of the dignity of those who suffer."
This sentence is the fail-safe mechanism of the entire paragraph. This is the ultimate metric that keeps the spreadsheet human.
I really see this as the emotional core of point 7. Because if you just look at the math, the goal is just keeping people alive, making sure their heart is beating, and they have baseline caloric intake.
Right.
But you can achieve those biological metrics in a prison. You can keep someone fed, sheltered, and disease-free inside a cage. They would generate a lot of QALYs.
But the ultimate metric of success here isn't just survival, it is dignity.
Yes, we need to analyze exactly what dignity means in the context of systemic suffering.
Well, to restore dignity means to give agency, self-respect, and self-determination back to the individual.
Because when someone is subjected to systemic poverty, war, or structural violence, the suffering strips away their agency.
Exactly. They become dependent on external forces just to survive. To truly eliminate the cause of suffering, you cannot just hand them resources. You have to restore their ability to author their own life.
Let's explore how a charitable intervention can actually destroy dignity while trying to help. This happens constantly with what we call paternalistic charity.
Oh, the classic savior complex model.
Right. A wealthy organization from the developed world swoops into an impoverished community. They don't consult the locals. They just arrive with trucks full of free grain or free clothes. They hand them out, take some photos, and leave.
And the math might actually say that intervention was highly efficient. It was cheap, and it fed a lot of people quickly.
But it violates the rule of dignity.
Exactly. Because by flooding the town with free grain, they just bankrupted all the local farmers who can't compete with free.
So the town is now fed for a month. But their local economy is destroyed, making them permanently dependent on the charity to come back next year.
You solved the biological problem of hunger, but you created a psychological and systemic problem of dependency. You stripped them of their dignity.
If you help someone, but you do it in a way that humiliates them, infantilizes them, or makes them permanently reliant on your benevolence, you have failed the objective of this manifesto.
True. Evidence-based care must include dignity as a non-negotiable outcome.
It's the profound difference between tossing a piece of bread on the ground for a hungry person to eat versus pulling out a chair, inviting them to sit at the table, looking them in the eye, and sharing a meal with them as an equal.
That's a powerful image.
Both actions stop the hunger. The math might even argue that tossing the bread is more efficient because it saves time. But only one of those actions restores dignity.
Because the bread on the ground reinforces a hierarchy. It clearly establishes who has the power and who is the beggar. The manifesto is arguing that the elimination of the causes of suffering is fundamentally incomplete if the person is left feeling less than human. Therefore, your effective altruism must be directed toward interventions that empower.
So, for example, instead of airdropping free clothes, you fund microloans that allow women in that community to build their own textile businesses.
Yes. You give them the capital to build their own infrastructure.
It forces the expert with the spreadsheet to actually sit down and talk to the people they're trying to help, to ask them what they need rather than dictating what they will receive.
Because without dignity, you haven't healed the person, you've just managed their symptoms.
You've just applied a more sophisticated mop.
Exactly.
Okay, I am entirely conceptually on board with this philosophy. It is beautiful, it is rigorous, and it is a massive upgrade to how we view charity.
All right.
But we have to address the elephant in the room. There is a massive, glaring mechanical flaw in asking human beings to live this way.
You're talking about the psychological toll.
The absolute crushing weight of it. If I am supposed to adopt this operating system, if I am required to constantly scan my environment for the silent violence of indifference,
Yeah.
if I am spending my evenings researching cost per life saved metrics to optimize my giving, if I am meticulously auditing every interaction to ensure I am restoring the dignity of everyone I meet, I am going to burn out in exactly 3 days.
It's true.
The human nervous system is not designed to carry the weight of global suffering nonstop. Activists, social workers, and highly empathetic people burn out all the time. They collapse under the weight of caring.
They absolutely do.
How does the text address the fact that this system seems designed to destroy the user?
It is a critical vulnerability. The activist community is historically plagued by severe burnout, chronic depression, and a highly toxic culture of self-sacrifice, where resting is viewed as a moral failure.
Yes, exactly.
But the authors of this text are attempting to build an enterprise-level societal system. An engineering system that runs its components so hard that they break down after 3 days is a poorly engineered system.
That's right.
The authors address this directly and brilliantly in the final sentence of point 7.
Let me read it. But we do this ecologically, ensuring that compassion multiplies strength rather than depleting it.
This is perhaps the most sophisticated conceptual loop in the entire paragraph, the application of the word ecologically.
Let's break down what ecology actually means. We usually apply it to nature, right? A forest, a coral reef, a watershed.
Right. An ecosystem is a perfectly balanced biological network.
Exactly. An ecosystem must remain in balance to survive its own existence. It has built-in cycles of growth, consumption, decay, and regeneration.
If a predator species becomes too successful and eats all the prey, the predator ultimately starves and the system collapses. There is a carrying capacity.
Right, so here the Manifesto is taking the scientific concept of ecology and applying it to the human soul and to community resources.
It's introducing the concept of sustainable empathy.
Sustainable empathy, I love that.
Yes. The text is formally acknowledging the reality of compassion fatigue. By stating that we must do this ecologically, the Manifesto is explicitly forbidding self-martyrdom.
Oh, wow.
If you give your time, your money, and your emotional energy until your cortisol levels spike, your health fails, and you are completely empty, you have broken the ecosystem. You have simply become another casualty of suffering that someone else now has to care for.
It's the classic airplane safety rule, right? When the cabin pressure drops, the flight attendant tells you to put your own oxygen mask on first, before assisting the child or person next to you.
Because if you hold your breath trying to help them, you will pass out from hypoxia, and now there are 2 victims instead of 1.
But this sentence goes even further than the oxygen mask analogy. It's not just about surviving the act of helping. It says compassion should multiply strength rather than depleting it.
Yes.
It's proposing a dynamic where the act of helping others actually generates more oxygen for the room.
That is the ultimate definition of synergy within an ecosystem. How do we design ethical interventions where the act of giving deeply nourishes the giver?
What does that look like in practice?
Well, it means abandoning the lone wolf savior complex. It means building robust communities of support so you aren't carrying the structural weight alone. It means setting rigid, healthy boundaries.
Setting boundaries is huge.
It requires you to celebrate the small, localized victories instead of only staring into the abyss of massive, insurmountable global tragedies.
So if your activism, or your charitable giving, or your deep empathy is leaving you constantly drained, bitter, cynical, and exhausted, according to the strict parameters of this manifesto, you're actually doing it wrong.
You are operating unecologically. You are treating your compassion as a fossil fuel, extracting it, burning it up for a quick burst of energy, and leaving behind toxic residue.
Yeah.
The system demands that compassion be engineered as a renewable resource. If it's depleting you, you are required to stop, recalibrate, and redesign your approach.
I want to speak directly to you again. If you are out there and you are currently burning yourself out, trying to save the world, trying to be everything for everyone, feeling guilty every time you take a day off.
Listen to this part closely.
This text is giving you permission, actually. It is commanding you to stop destroying yourself. You are required to survive the process of helping.
Your physical and mental well-being is a fundamentally necessary component of a peaceful world.
You cannot build a global architecture of human dignity if you are dismantling your own dignity in the process.
It perfectly completes the conceptual circle of the paragraph.
It really does.
We started with the harsh demand for the active elimination of suffering. We added the rigorous math to ensure it was effective. We anchored the math in the unquantifiable metric of human dignity. And finally, we made sure the entire emotional machine runs on renewable energy.
It is a masterclass in ethical engineering.
It truly is.
Okay, let's step back, take a deep breath, and look at the territory we have just covered. We have taken an incredibly intense forensic journey through just a few lines of a massive text.
We really unpacked a lot today.
We started by dismantling the dopamine trap of passive sympathy, realizing that feeling bad isn't the same as fixing the pipe.
We learned that the blind referee of justice desperately needs the proactive coach of care to prevent society from becoming a punitive dystopia.
And we confronted the terrifying reality that in an interconnected world, the silent violence of indifference makes us complicit in the suffering we ignore.
We brought in the spreadsheets of effective altruism to bypass our biological biases and maximize our impact.
We established that handing out resources is useless if it doesn't result in the restoration of human agency and dignity.
And we grounded the entire demanding framework in ecological sustainability, ensuring our empathy doesn't become a fossil fuel that destroys us.
It is a blueprint for a completely different, highly intentional way of moving through your daily life. It changes everything about how you view your responsibilities to the people around you.
It absolutely does.
And I will leave you with a final lingering idea to mull over as you go about the rest of your day. This is a concept that builds on everything we've just discussed.
I'm intrigued.
If we truly accept the premise of this manifesto, if we accept that indifference is a form of violence, and that our compassion must be both mathematically effective and ecologically sustainable, how do we calculate our daily compassion footprint?
Oh, that is a fascinating metric to consider.
Right. We are all familiar with the carbon footprint. It measures the unseen environmental impact of your daily choices, the car you drive, the food you eat.
Yeah.
Well, your compassion footprint measures your unseen ethical impact. Every single interaction you have today, or crucially, choose not to have, leaves a mark on the interconnected web of the world's suffering.
The coffee you buy from an exploitative supply chain?
The stressed colleague you choose to ignore because you're busy. The charity link you scroll past without applying the math of effective altruism. What does your footprint look like today?
Are you leaving a trail of silent violence and symptom management?
Or are you actively, ecologically eliminating the root causes of pain while maintaining your own strength?
It asks you to view your life not as a series of isolated events, but as a continuous ethical current.
Exactly. The next time you're lying in the dark, scrolling through your phone, feeling that weight in your chest as you look at a broken world, remember that you don't just have to be a passive victim to that feeling.
You don't just have to feel the sadness.
You have the structural tools to fix the pipe.
The wrench is waiting for you to pick it up.
Thank you for joining us on this incredibly focused, challenging intellectual journey. Remember, the smallest, most highly optimized shift in perspective really can change the machinery of the world. Keep learning, keep questioning the systems around you, and we'll see you in the next deep dive.